couple slides for your face.
So we finished the notes yesterday?
No, we have 2 more things there.
But this is all for next year.
No.
Just a few sign up like, what? I'm so.
All right, so you need to start on the last packet, not the packet I just gave you. There's I think at the very end of the other packet,
Yeah, it's like the same.
we need to look at spermatogenesis and oogenesis, that diagram. And then I reprinted for you mitosis versus meiosis, that table. So just have to look at the end of the last packet, and then we'll move on to this next one. So we know that meiosis happens only in sexually reproducing organisms, and only happens for the purpose of producing gametes. In animals, that's sperm and egg cells. So that's what this diagram is showing you. There's some important things to understand about this. So first off, this process is called gametogenesis, the production of gametes. If we specifically are talking about the production of sperm cells, it's called spermatogenesis. Okay? If we're talking specifically about the production of egg cells, it's oogenesis. 2 O's at the beginning. Okay? And so that's what these are showing. So we know in gametogenesis, we start off up here with our original, what we call germ cells, the cells that eventually are going to give rise to sperm and egg cells. Okay? And the process, it starts with these original germ cells going through mitosis to produce more cells. Okay? These cells, which are still diploid, okay, these sort of cells that are going to become sperm cells eventually, are spermatogonia or oogonia, depending on which one we're talking about. Okay? And so they produce, these cells grow into sort of an immature cell that is eventually going to go through meiosis. These are called the spermatocytes. They're still diploid, okay? But what's going to happen is that these cells will go through both divisions of meiosis, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. That's when the chromosome number gets reduced. It's when these diploid cells are transformed into haploid cells. And in sperm cells, a single spermatocyte will form 4 full sperm cells. Spermatids is the technical term for that. So we'll form 4 of these. This happens in the testes, but the final maturation of those sperm cells, when they start to become motile, when the flagellum starts to function properly, that happens in the epididymis, which is an area outside of the testes. So that's how sperm cells are produced. It's pretty straightforward. When we look at a sperm cell, one individual sperm cell has a few different parts to it. The very head of the sperm has this acrosome. This is an area, has enzymes, and has special structure that allows it to penetrate into the outer layer of the egg. And the enzymes found in this acrosome start to allow the nucleus of the sperm cell to actually enter and fuse with the nucleus of the egg cell. Okay? So that's very important. The chromosomes, the genetic materials found here in the head of the sperm in the nucleus, it's very condensed, surrounded by a cell membrane. Then you have an area, then you have this area which contains mitochondria. Because mitochondria are very important for the sperm cell because it needs a lot of ATP in order to make its way from when it's deposited in the vagina to the fallopian tube where it can eventually meet that egg cell that has been ovulated. So it has that journey to make. So these mitochondria allow for the production of ATP to move the flagellum. Okay? This is the flagellum, sort of the tail of the sperm that it uses to swim to the egg. The nutrients for these mitochondria comes from the fluids, the seminal fluids that are produced by the prostate gland and other glands that produce semen, because semen is a mixture of those specific sperm cells, but also other compounds that are needed to help nourish those sperm as they're making that journey. So that's sort of the structure of the sperm cell. We know that males will produce sperm cells from puberty throughout the rest of their lifetime. Okay? Versus in females, the primary oocytes are present in the ovaries basically from birth, and no new ones are produced afterwards. Now, if we look at the same sort of process to produce egg cells, it's a little bit different. So again, we start with germ cells, the original progenitor cells. They can divide through mitosis. Okay? This happens in fetal development. Okay? This happens in 20 to 40 weeks is where these cells are being formed in the ovaries of a fetus. Okay? And then those initial cells, those oogonia, go through this growth phase and they start to form the primary oocyte. This is the cell that will undergo meiosis. And actually meiosis begins prenatally, before the fetus is born. But it stops. It sort of gets paused in prophase of meiosis 1. Okay? And then it stops. And it's basically paused until puberty, until ovulation begins. And once ovulation begins in the female, then once each reproductive cycle or so, one of those oocytes starts back into meiosis and goes through the rest of the phases. Goes on to metaphase, anaphase, telophase 1 to form 2 cells, we know. And these are now haploid cells. But the difference is that when the cytoplasm divides in the egg cells, it divides unevenly. One of the cells gets the vast majority of the cytoplasm. Okay? That's this cell. The other cell is called a polar body. It gets only a very small amount of cytoplasm in one set of the chromosomes. These 2 cells then go through the next meiosis 2. And again, they each are going to split into 2 cells. Again, though, the splitting is uneven. One of the cells ends up with the vast majority of the cytoplasm in one set of chromosomes. The other cells get smaller amounts of the cytoplasm in a set of chromosomes. These things are called the polar bodies. They're also haploid, but they basically just dissolve and disintegrate. And this is the only cell that actually is an ovum, an egg cell that could be fertilized. So really, in meiosis, an oocyte does produce 4 cells. They're all haploid, but 3 of them are non-functional. 3 of them just disintegrate. And we're left with 1 single egg that gets released during ovulation into the fallopian tube, and then fertilization can take place. So those are sort of the differences between the production of eggs and sperm cells. Again, the production of those cells, I'm going to skip this video for right now, but we'll look at this. But in the testes in the male, in the ovaries for the female, maybe we'll come back to that at some point. So again, I think we already have talked about this enough, but you should know the difference in mitosis and meiosis. Mitosis, asexual reproduction. Growth of cells, repair of tissue. Meiosis only for one purpose, and that's to produce gametes, sperm and egg cells, or other gametes. Happens in the testes and ovaries. In asexual reproduction, one parent's involved. Sexual reproduction, we need gametes from 2 different parents. Mitosis maintains chromosome number. Diploid cells produce other diploid cells. Meiosis reduces the number of chromosomes. Diploid cells creates haploid cells. Mitosis, there is no synapsis. There's no tetrad. There is no crossing over. All of those things do happen in meiosis. There's no variation in the cells produced in mitosis. There is variation in the cells produced in meiosis. Mitosis yields 2 daughter cells. Meiosis yields 4. 4 will become sperm cells, but again, only one will become a functional ovum In the female, the other 3 polar bodies just dissolve. All right, so we need to, so the parts that are going to be on your quiz on Friday are just the next 3 slides. So after ovulation, okay, an egg is released from an ovary. One of those ovum starts to travel through the fallopian tube, and that's where it can be fertilized. And so fertilization is the combining of the nucleus of a sperm cell, the genetic material of the sperm cell, with the genetic material of the ovum. And because the sperm cell is haploid and the egg cell is haploid, when they combine, they return the zygote back to the typical diploid number. The zygote is diploid. Haploid sperm plus haploid egg equals diploid zygote. And that zygote has chromosomes from both the male and female, half of the chromosomes from each parent. And so that zygote then, as it travels through the fallopian tube, starts to go through a series of cell divisions that we call cleavage. Okay? And so these cell divisions are through mitosis. Again, the number of chromosomes needs to be maintained. Okay, so happens pretty quick. We go from a single cell, they both divide to form 2 cells. They divide to form 4 cells and 8 cells and so forth. Now at this point, these cells are all identical to each other. It's just a mass of what we call undifferentiated cells. Okay, so it produces a little cluster of cells called a blastula. So first it's called a morula when it's a sort of cluster of cells in between these stages. That means a blackberry, I think, in Latin, morula or something like that. Because that's what it looks like, a little cluster of individual cells. Eventually, that cluster of cells becomes hollow. Hollow cluster of cells, call that a blastula. These cells are undifferentiated. They each have basically the potential to develop into any cell in the body. So there's a term for this. These are called pluripotent stem cells. It means they're just sort of generic cells that under the proper conditions could become any cell in the body. And so why have you probably heard of stem cells? Has anyone heard of stem cells? Not having to do with plants, not that sort of stem. Antonio?
Oh, I heard that like they did something that age before like paralyzed people or something like that.
So stem cells are an area of research that's very, very important because these cells could become any cell in the body. They have that potential. So scientists are looking at the use of stem cells, like Antonio mentioned. If we have damage to the nervous system, we know that generally neurons, nerve tissue does not regenerate, does not heal very well. Well, if we can take these stem cells, which have the ability to become any other cell, if in the lab or in the body we can give them the proper conditions to transform them into nerve cells, well, maybe we can help for that nerve tissue to regenerate. Okay? So stem cell research is a very popular and area in which scientists are looking for new forms of treatment for lots of different diseases. We're going to learn more about that, read an article, watch a video probably tomorrow. So these, this blastula forms it's a hollow cell, and then it starts to indent. It starts to gastrulate, we call it. There starts to become this sort of indentation that will run its way through that cell, through that cluster of cells. And it starts to form 3, what we call germ layers, 3 layers of cells that eventually give rise to all of the various tissues of the body. The 3 layers are called the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm. Endo meaning inside, ecto meaning outside, meso meaning middle. Okay? And so in this embryo, the ectoderm, the outer layer of cells, will form organs such as the skin, neurons in the brain, okay, in the peripheral nervous system. The middle layer of cells, the mesoderm layer, eventually gives rise to the spinal cord, skeletal muscles, kidneys, blood cells. The innermost layer, the endoderm, becomes cells in the pancreas and the thyroid and the alveoli of the lungs. So each of these germ layers gives rise to various tissues in the body. When we actually look at these cells, you can see this. Fertility doctors, for example, can do in vitro fertilization. They can take an egg cell from a mother, fertilize it with a sperm cell from a father in a petri dish. Can insert that sperm so it's fertilized and allow that fertilized zygote to start to grow outside of the body. That's what in vitro fertilization is. And so we could see actual images of this. So we have a single cell, it splits into 2 and 4, eventually forming a cluster of cells, the morula, okay? Eventually forming the blastula over here, which is hollow, although we can't see it. And then we see the start of gastralization, whereas this is indenting, starting to form this indentation, eventually will lead throughout the whole embryo. What do you think that indentation becomes? Right?
Like the intestine.
Yeah, the digestive tract. Okay? One of those indentations becomes the mouth, the other end becomes the anus. That indentation is our digestive tract that goes throughout our whole body. We'll watch the stem cell video tomorrow. All right, any questions about any of that? That's the extent of what will be on your quiz.